Hi everybody, we're back on the Senate floor with a special guest today, our friend David Dewhurst, the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Texas. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elliot. Nice to be with you again.
I want to first say to all of our viewers today, what a friend you've been to El Paso, and particularly on the medical school. You never got the credit you were due in making sure that happened. Every year on this floor, you put it in the budget, you helped stay with it, and finally we got it done. And I want to personally invite you this year, in August, when those first students walk across the stage at the El Paso Medical School, because you were a big part of making that happen.
That's exciting. I look forward to being there. I wasn't sure we were ever going to get it done. You and I kept working together hand in glove, and I kept sticking it. Every time we had a legislative budget board meeting, every budget I kept putting it in there. We finally got it done. And I want to thank you publicly for your championing the funding on the school. As a matter of fact, you and I were just talking yesterday about some of your priorities. Two being making sure that we've got the $17 million in our base budget for the clinical staff and research. It's in there.
Great.
Yes, sir. Secondly, I don't know with the downturn in the economy whether or not we can do a whole new tuition revenue bond package, but if we can, count on me to try and help.
Well, I appreciate that. And we've done a lot in El Paso to rebrand ourselves, to look at a global economy and say, here's where we can compete the best.
Right.
Here's how we can create jobs. We've built it around a robust military presence, around medicine, around mobility, around manufacturing in Mexico. So we've identified ourselves and have worked real hard on that piece of it. But without your help, and frankly, the state of Texas, we could not have gotten there. So I wanted to start out by saying what a champion you've been for our medical school.
Well, thank you. It's, I think, as you do, that it's extremely important, not just for El Paso. One of the first things, I remember you and I were sitting at dinner, maybe 6-7 years ago, and you said the number one economic multiplier that I can see for this city that'll be a magnet, it'll help grow it, and it'll help the health, not only in El Paso, but the whole border and the Hispanic population, is a fine medical school here, and I've been on board ever since.
Well, we appreciate it. And I wanted to segue now into what's happening in the world, in America, and how it relates to Texas, and take this session and get your impressions of the priorities, what we've got to get done, and what hopefully we can get done this session.
Well, this is going to be a tough session. Now remember, you and I were together in the 2003 session. That was real tough, $10 billion deficit. But we came together, Republicans, Democrats, House, Senate, we came together and we were able to balance that budget and I believe still maintain all the support for our essential services without raising taxes. And the economy, we're still doing pretty good in Texas. We're doing better than 44 other states out there, but that doesn't help that middle-class family that tugs at my heartstrings and yours, that this evening is going to be sitting at a dinner table. One spouse or the other is going to be worried about holding on to their job, making a mortgage payment, making a car payment, making sure that their children can go to college. And so I want to do everything I can. I want to work with all 31 of you all in the Senate and work with our counterparts over the House to make sure that we get our budget balanced, we're protecting our essential services, and we leave a little bit of money in there, a reasonable amount of money in our rainy day. So we're not facing in the 2011 session what we had to face in the 2003 session. I mean, as one of two traditional business people elected among our 29 statewide elected officials, I look at numbers almost every day, and it's so clear to me. Just like in 2007, when I asked you and I asked our senators, I'm real worried about whether or not we can balance our budget in 2009 unless we save some money. And y'all were supportive, and I appreciate that. The reason why we're not one of the 44 states, one of the 45 states that has a deficit right now is because we saved $7 billion. Now, some of my friends want to spend more money in 2007, some wanted to send money back. But remember, I said, look, let's see how we are in the summer of 2008. Let's see what this new business tax brings in. Let's see where the economy is. And unfortunately, that turned out to be a wise thing to do to save some money. So we're in the black for two reasons. One, we saved $7 billion. And two, we've had just tremendous growth here in this state. Last year, 2008, 200,000 new jobs were created around the state. The governor's office says 70% of the new jobs created in November through November 2007, 2008, 70% of the new jobs created in America were created right here in Texas. So that's good, but how about those folks that are feeling a pinch right now? That's why I went down to Seguin last week to announce with Governor Perry 1,400 new jobs being created in Seguin. My priorities are to make sure that the budget's balanced, but it's a fair budget. You and I have talked about taking care of the vulnerable in our society that don't have anybody else to take care of. In our base budget, and I believe we're going to add to that base budget. In fact, I know we're going to add to that base budget. We still need to hold on to some money in our rainy day fund, make sure we're okay in 2011. But we've included all of our enrollment growth, plus we've got almost $2.5 billion new money on top of that. Because I know I don't want to see our school districts have to reach into their reserves and deplete our reserves. I want to make sure that we continue to build on what we did in the 2006 session. I'd like to see us continue this progress where we're ending teaching to the TOKS test. We've got end of course. And something you and I have talked about, let's measure progress, particularly where we've got students that are maybe English as a second language. So let's go in there, create a new baseline. Let's reward students and teachers and schools for making progress on doing a better job. Let's get them ready for these end of course exams. With higher education, this has been a priority of mine. I know it's been a priority of yours. In some years, 2005, we put $1.2 billion new money in. 2007, $1.5 billion, $2.7 billion. Well, we're not going to have that kind of money this year, regrettably, but how much more can we do? How do we help our schools? How do we incentivize so we get more math graduates and more science graduates and more engineering graduates and more teachers and more nurses? We've got a critical shortage. You and I were just talking yesterday about Fort Bliss and all the people coming in. We're going to need 680, I think you said, doctors, 2,200 nurses. So we've got to either get the federal government to help us, or we've got to figure out ways through maybe incentives to get more doctors, more nurses into the El Paso area. Transportation's a key. We've had our problems with TxDOT. I've got my fingers crossed those problems are behind us. But as you remember, the voters approved $5 billion worth of bonding in November 2007. I'm hoping, working together, we'll get them to take some amount of that $5 billion and create like an equity revolver, so that the two becomes 10 or 12 billion. It's almost like an equity revolving fund. And the remaining funds, plus some of our gas tax funds and bonds, our Proposition 14, should keep them busy, not just for the next 2 years building, but for the next 3 years. Healthcare is a very important subject. And we're not going to have time to go into a lot of detail today, but I'm committed, I know you're committed, to helping the people in our society who truly don't have anybody else to help them, and that's kids, and that's the elderly and frail and disabled. I stood, I'm 6'5", but I stood as tall as I could back in 2003 when some of our friends in the House wanted to eliminate the CHIP program and reduce eligibility, and that's not right. That wasn't right. But we've got, on the CHIP program, we've got about 550,000 children that are enrolled right now, but it's only a third of the number that are eligible. We've got to do a better job in reaching out and getting them covered because they're already eligible. And, at the end of the day, not only is it the most practical thing to do, probably the most economical thing to make sure that kids have immunizations and annual physicals and shots, but it's the right thing to do.
Let's get back and talk about some of these issues. You've covered a lot of territory there, and you've been certainly passing on the Senate floor and covering these and been in middle of committees and some of these to testify. But I want to talk about education. My view is on this Senate floor, that's our job one. When you look at what federal government does, pretty much it's defense, local government is safety, but here it's education. That's our job. That's 65 cents of everything that we do here in one way or another. So when we're talking about Texas in higher education, this word tier one's going around. Tier one generally means you got $100 million of research that you're doing that's turning into commercializable ideas, into patents, into really the spark plug of economies when you look at California, the East Coast, other places. What will we do this session, particularly on tier one, and where do you see that going over time?
I agree with everything that you just got through saying, except that as I've tried to understand exactly what U.S. News and World Report and other different magazines, how they define tier one, you know, it's nationally recognized research universities and they have different criteria. But I'd like to see us come up with a mechanism. Well, first let me go back. We've got two recognized flagships here in Texas right now, University of Texas in Austin and A&M in Bryan-College Station. We've got 7 schools that at least the coordinating board, the Higher Education Coordinating Board, calls emerging research universities. The University of Texas in El Paso, University of Texas in San Antonio, University of Texas in Dallas, University of Texas in Arlington, the Texas Tech in Lubbock, and University of North Texas, and the University of Houston. 7 fine universities. I'd like to see us set up a mechanism that we can implement, hopefully some this year, but as we grow out of, as the recession, the national recession ebbs, and our Texas economy once again is leading, as it is right now, the rest of the country, we'll have more revenue and we can do more. But a mechanism in which, and I've talked to almost all of our university presidents, but something where the state matches up to a limit that we set, and it may vary from biennium to biennium depending upon our revenues, but we match new research dollars brought in, money raised locally, alumni, some combination of this. So that we're able to, over time, create more flagship universities. By your question, you know as well as I do, you can't do it overnight. I mean, we couldn't walk up to any one of these 7 universities, hand them $100 million, A, expect them to spend it efficiently, and B, it's going to take a long time. But one thing, one of our 2 flagship presidents told me the other day, you know, 44, 45 states are cutting back public education spending, they're cutting back higher education spending. We're not, we're adding to it. And this is a wonderful time, whether you're talking about the University of Texas in El Paso, which you're a big supporter of, or one of our other 6 emerging research universities, and or our flagships, to be able to go out and recruit faculty. This is a wonderful opportunity to start.
I totally agree with you. To put a pitch in for UTEP, UTEP's gone from 0, basically, to number 4 on that list, through a lot of sweat equity. And now there's 17 PhD programs out there. Their portfolio research is at $50 million. And so the idea of matching sweat equity, what they've produced from sweat, blood, and tears, grab talent, bring it in, get them to do grant applications, and start building up that portfolio in engineering, in computing, in math, in international business, in healthcare. That's, I think, where we go in Texas, is to try and match that, incentivize it, and look at it as performance pay. You've done this, you've got a proven track record, let's help accelerate your growth rather than sit and say, well, let's just put a crown on somebody and say, you're going to be the next one. And I think from our point of view, I think that's the proven path, and that's what I'd hope we'd do in the state of Texas. And certainly the nanotechnology they're doing at University of Texas at Arlington, the growth there in engineering at University of Texas at Dallas, my old alma mater, Rice University's way out there in some of these things. But I think our record here is take proven success and try and incentivize it so we've got the best expenditure of dollars, the most value-added method of getting to a tier 1, I think would match what other states and other countries have done. When I read what China's doing, and they've got this pretty ambitious goal of having 100 research universities in 20 years, that's where the fight's going to be, in my opinion, and that's where I think we need to get after it. I want to switch now to...
and Senator Zamperini with the Higher Education Subcommittee is right where you are.
I'd like to switch now a little bit to another topic, and that is military base realignment and closing, the great story of Texas in the last round and what happened from 2005 to present. And now let's talk a little bit about Fort Bliss and what you see happening there. You're well aware, you've been in the middle of our growth. You've come out many times to see that marvelous installation, but now there's some state impacts there to schools, to roads, to healthcare, to healthcare professionals. So how can we as a state get in the middle of supporting that growth, making sure the state's doing its share of that, and making sure that DOD can look to Texas and say, this is a military-friendly state.
Well, first of all, I want to compliment you. You have led our subcommittee on BRAC now for 6 years. You've done a great job. You have spent countless hours. This is something you feel very passionate about, and it's so important to your district. So I thank you, and I know the people of your district thank you. After the other day when we were sitting down and having a long conversation, let's get the commissioner from the TEA, Robert Scott. Let's get Senator Florence Shapiro. Let's get the four of us together and take a look at this. With such a huge avalanche, with such an almost sudden avalanche of people coming into El Paso, and the need for additional schools. We were just talking about medical personnel just a moment ago. Let's see what we can do in addition. Maybe outside the formulas, additional help that'll help you right now.
I think that'd be tremendous. I think it's unheard of in a BRAC town to have 67,000 troops and dependents dropped in the middle of the mix. It's like a whole town just moved into El Paso, and I'm not sure a lot of folks are aware of the size of it and what it entails in terms of 300 new teachers, 680 new doctors, 2,200 new nurses, social services, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and those sorts of impacts on the local community. We need to support our military men and women in uniform, and also make sure that this network of care is in place in the next 4 years as it comes to El Paso. And you've certainly been a champion over the last few sessions.
I agree.
Let's go to something that I think it's beginning the impact is seen here, and I'm hearing more and more folks talk about it, and that's Mexico. Mm-hmm. And what has happened in Juarez over the last year, I think, is a tragedy, international tragedy. You've got many friends in our community and in Juarez. You have lifelong friends, some of your business acquaintances in Mexico. And we saw 1,600 murders in Juarez last year. What is, first, the national role? What do we do nationally? And then what do we do at the state level with respect to our sister cities? What is it that we can do that would be effective in stemming the tide of violence and making sure that it doesn't come into our communities and our state?
You know, for a long time, I have been disappointed with the role in the federal government along our border. We've got a porous border. I'm just not talking about illegal immigration. You know, I've never, you've seen some of my TV spots. I'm not mad about people wanting to come to America. America's a great country. You know, I'm not mad about that. But I'm mad just we haven't secured our border. We just have a relatively few number of Border Patrol, brave men and women on the border. And I'm not talking about illegal immigration. There are 4 problems we have with our border, and just one of those is illegal immigration. We've got a third war going on, not just Afghanistan and Iraq. We've got a third war, dangerous drug traffickers bringing in dangerous drugs every day, killing Americans. We've got a war going on. 3, we've got a tremendous increase, and as you were just referring to, in transnational gangs, almost all of here in Texas, in almost every city, most of which is related to the drug cartels in Mexico. Last Tuesday, I'm at Senator Duncan's mom's funeral in Vernon. And the DPS officer who happened to be there with me was talking about an increase in gang activity and drug cartel activity in Wichita Falls. Wichita Falls, crazy. We got people walking across the border every year with passports from terrorist countries. And as someone who used to be on a presidential commission and restructuring our foreign intelligence agencies, and it scares me to death. So we need to secure the border, and that's more Border Patrol. And it's not that expensive. We can do that. On the state level, you and I have touched on this before, and I think you're right. We need to put in place a stronger working relationship between state police, DPS, intelligence operations. This is not acceptable. This is not acceptable when you start to see murders and people, and it's spilling over into El Paso and Laredo and these other areas. We need to do a better job, I think, on intelligence gathering. We need to do it working with our federal counterparts, and look at where our smuggling, human smuggling, where these gang activity is coming across, and do a better job in fighting against that. So I'd be supportive of more money and more personnel going into an area like El Paso and this activity.
Let's talk about something you and I have talked about a lot, which is Texas prosperity, regaining manufacturing base, supporting that value-added section of the economy. That's where really value starts in the chain of economic activity, and how we can get goods across the border in safe, secure manner. After 9/11, we saw at the border that the value was shut the border down, and we're going to check everything coming across, no matter who it is, instead of looking at a risk analysis. If this person has no risk history at all, and what's coming across their TVs from Philips, and that's half the nation's supply of TVs, and we're sending things down to Mexico, we're creating jobs in Texas. So how do we look at making these border ports not only more secure, but safer and faster for trade and transportation? What do you see there?
Can I brag on you to your viewers? Folks, if there's any question in your mind, this man, my friend, has been in my office on this subject 227 times, at least 227 times. Okay. At your urging, I wrote the former Secretary of Homeland Security on the smart cards, just like they're doing up in Vancouver, to move traffic across that border more quickly. We've had some objection from some of our state officials, but I think you're right and I'm right on this. As you do a risk analysis, as things have already gone into containers and manufacturing facilities over in Juarez, for instance, move them across the border, expedite them, move people with the smart cards on the passports and also on the trucks. Makes all the sense in the world. There's no reason to see these long, long lines when I go to the International Bridge.
If we're sitting here in June, and we've had another successful and peaceful time on the Senate floor, and we're looking at your checklist. This is what David Dewhurst so wanted to get done for the future of the state of Texas. Tell me, what are the top 3 things that are on that list? What got done this session?
Well, I want to make sure that we've got a budget that leaves us in pretty good shape for 2011. So we are holding on to some money into our rainy day fund. But we funded our public education adequately. We've come up with a system to start to create new flagship universities. And hopefully we put some seed money in that. We funded TxDOT. And so we've got the money in place for the next 3 or 4 years that will enable them to build. I've been working, just coincidentally, with TxDOT monthly since February 9th, when I asked them for a priority list of what it takes, what's the cost to go build out all the roads in the next 10 years as our population grows from 7 to 9 million people, to reduce congestion. And it's not the $331 billion number. It's a number more like $19, $20, $25 billion. So I think it's manageable. I want to change the way, you ready for this? I want to change the way medicine is practiced in Texas, because there's no saying, if you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always gotten. My friend, we're getting crowd out. The programs, we're getting crowd out in public education, higher education, transportation, because our healthcare costs are going up double digits, and none of the other programs are. All right. Now, I'm a believer in healthcare. And I want to take care of the vulnerable, like I said, kids and elderly and frail and disabled. But we don't have a health care system in America. We got a sick care. What's the country in the world that spends the second most per capita on health care?
Right here.
Switzerland. Switzerland. All the other countries in Western Europe, Scandinavia, England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan spend less than Switzerland. Who spends more? The United States, by a factor of 2. Why? Because we pay doctors and hospitals exclusively for the number of procedures they do, rather than best practices, outcomes, prevention, and wellness. My goal is to be able to start a process with a pilot program, goal being to reward our doctors, cut the hassle, have everyone follow best practices, reduce the occupancy in our hospitals because we focused on wellness and prevention. I know it's doable. Rand Corp just came out with a study. A third, they argue, of the $2.5 trillion we spend per year on health care is ineffective, just not effective. But just do the numbers. That's enough to provide some safety net, some reinsurance, some catastrophic coverage for all those people out there that don't have any coverage. That would be a great, great goal if we could achieve that. Again, I want to build on our successes in public education. I want to create baseline. I want to be able to judge our students and our schools based upon their growth. And I want to set in place a number of the machinery, the procedure, so that we can reward over time more schools with a flagship status.
Well, I want to invite you again to your favorite place to go, El Paso, Texas. And I want to
well, you do know, just for your viewers.
You do have some other districts, I understand.
No, I understand. But just to remind your audience, my grandparents are from El Paso. I spent a lot of time out there, and I've spent a lot of time out there in El Paso with you. So,
in hearing you articulate what your vision is and priorities are, we have for many years taken a lead on preventative health care. We saw the obesity crisis hit early. When you're looking at 300-pound eighth graders and looking at the public health care costs of that into the future, not to mention the dramatic quality of life impacts that that's going to have, it's a wake-up call. And where we see the greatest gains in preventative health are in the early years, lifelong health habits,
right,
lifelong nutrition. And so there is a school district where we're piloting Eagles Rock, the first nutrition and outdoor education program in the public schools in Texas, starting in the 1st grade and going to the 12th grade. So those are built in as values every single year you're in school. Very unique place. You've got the river there, so you can use the Rio Grande as one venue. You got the biggest urban mountain park in the country, 24,000 acres in Mount Franklin. And between the two, huge opportunities for kids to learn all about those values and those traditions where you get a healthy, lifelong health habits, both in nutrition, connecting to locally grown food and much better caloric intake, and long term, those health habits that going into life, you don't look so much like me, but you look like you, where you don't have.
The other way around.
You know,
the other way around.
But I want to invite you out there. It's going to be a dynamite program.
You know, you got a number of innovative programs. I mean, I'm Sunset High School in El Paso. I talk about it all the time. Not really open during the day, but it's for dropouts and single moms and things like that. I've always been fascinated by the example where everyone has a computer and they move. On average, these kids at Sunset High in El Paso graduate advance 2 grades per year. They just go in there incentivized. They go as fast as they can. No, you got a lot of programs, but let me go take a look at this program with you when I'm out there next.
It'd be great. I want to thank you, Governor, for coming out to El Paso as much as you have.
My pleasure.
But more for the strong support here on the Senate floor. When we come with an agenda from El Paso, we always meet in the first week of the session to say these are the 4 things that we're working on together that we'd like to get done, and our friend has been David Dewhurst in making sure those are placed in the budget and are a priority, not just for us, but for the state of Texas. So on behalf of the people I represent in the great city of El Paso, I want to thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
And for being a friend to El Paso, Texas.
You got it. Thank you, my friend.
Until next time, until we come back here to the Senate floor, this has been Austin in Focus with Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst. Thanks for watching.